Hi, I'm Andy Jones, content editor for Plaid's online education program, Let's Paint. Welcome to Color Lessons. Today we're painting a landscape titled Sunset Marsh.
For all of our color lessons, I'm using FolkArt's Pure Artist Pigment paint. It's been specially formulated to be very, very thick so that you can use this for a wide range of painting techniques. We can use it thinned down for transparent watercolor effects, or you can use it with a palette knife for really thick, rich impasto work. The 20 colors of FolkArt Pure Artist Pigments are available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint. And in the set, there is also a great color theory worksheet that is specially coded for you to paint on and reuse if you'd like to. And this is included in the kit with the 20 colors. So this is a great color theory booklet, and we also support this with an online video. I'm also using the FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment mixing mat, and this is a great tool to use in place of a palette. It's a reusable silicone mat, and it has spaces to put your colors out around the edge of the palette. Part of it is gray so that you can see exactly what value of colors that you're using. Part of it's white so that you can see how transparent a color is. It also has a quick guide for color harmonies as well as a little vocabulary list so that you can keep yourself familiar with color theory terms. This is a great product, and I think you'll really enjoy using it, and you can use it over and over and over. It cleans off beautifully and does not stain. For all the color lessons, I'm using the FolkArt Select Firm Bristle Brush. These brushes have been designed with a firm bristle synthetic filament, and it is great for canvas painting. It will stand up to lots of abuse. With care and cleaning, these brushes will last you a long, long time. They're perfect for canvas painting as well as any other kind of fabric painting that you're going to do. I think you're really going to love these FolkArt Select Firm Bristle brushes. They're available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint in a package of 7 beautiful brushes. Some of you are concerned that you can't draw. Well, we've got you covered because we're teaching you how to paint, not how to draw. The color lessons come with a package of full color photographs so that you have a complete set of all of the photographs for all of your color lessons paintings. In addition to that, we have full-size pattern sheets. So they're printed out for you so you don't have to enlarge anything, and you can transfer the designs directly to your canvas. So these also are available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint.
This painting is done on a 9x12 gallery wrap canvas, and to do something slightly different, I base coated my canvas with FolkArt acrylic uniform blue. You can use any color of navy blue or dark blue that you want to, but this sets the background for our entire painting. So a couple of coats of uniform blue, and then I transferred my horizon line to the canvas. And now a little trick that I'm going to use is I'm going to incorporate the uniform blue into the actual painting. So I'm going to put some uniform blue out onto my silicone mixing mat. And now I'm going to put out some FolkArt Pure Artist Pigments Titanium White. And I have a small portion cup here, and I have put FolkArt Floating Medium into the portion cup so that I know where it is on my palette and I don't have to search for it. So I'm going to dress my 1-inch flat brush with some floating medium, just pick some up and work it into the bristles of my brush. And the floating medium is going to make my paint a little bit transparent and much easier to work with. And so I'm going to pick up some of my uniform blue and mix that in with the floating medium. So it's a very slick and translucent. And I'm going to start on my canvas, and I'm just going to quickly brush a little bit of this thinned uniform blue onto the top 2/3 of my sky. Pick up more paint and floating medium as I need it. I just want to have the same blue color kind of slick all over the sky in the background. And that's going to be the basis of my little blue areas of clouds. So just casually brush this on, and that's just setting the stage for the light blue clouds that we're going to put on there. And as I said, I'm mixing the blue with the floating medium so that it's just easier to apply to the canvas. And this is incorporating our background into the painting. I'm going to pick up a little bit of titanium white on my 1-inch flat brush, and I'm going to brush mix a little bit of the uniform blue with the titanium white, making kind of a light blue color or a lighter blue color. And I'm going to begin to establish the lighter blue clouds in the upper portion of the sky. And I'm going to do that by holding my brush parallel to the surface of the canvas. And I'm just going to lay on this lighter blue color and soften it in to the wet color in the background. So I'm going to just continue to soften this light blue across the canvas, creating some light blue clouds. If I need to, I can add some more floating medium to my brush and just add some extra light bits here and there. This is a very contemporary painting, a very abstract painting. So just picking up a little bit more floating medium just to soften this out. Just let this color trail away. And as this dries, that will become more transparent and fade away a little bit more. I'm going to carry some right off to the right-hand edge of the canvas. I'm going to pick up a little bit more white and blue mixture on my brush. I want to create a little bit brighter blue clouds. Love this kind of sky when you've got the sky is dark and you can see some of the blue and then the brilliant oranges and pinks that show up in the sky. It's so pretty. So I'm just going to set in some of these lighter clouds. And again, it's an abstraction of clouds. We're not going to even try to like soften the edges of these clouds. We're just going to let the brushwork show through. So right now we've got darker blue, light blue, some medium clouds, and something fading across over there. So that's plenty of the light blue clouds. I think I'm going to do one other thing before we dry this and move on to our next step with this. I'm going to take my palette knife and just mix a little bit of this light blue color. And I want to pick it up just on one edge of my palette knife. So I'll scrape through the paint and I'll show you right here. I have just a little bit of paint on one edge of my palette knife, and it's only on the back side of my palette knife. And I'm going to lay this color down just below my horizon line, lining up my palette knife and leaving just a little gap there and just pulling down a little bit of a highlight. I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint and add that on. And just a final little bit of blue right there. Okay, so that's got a little bit of blue reflecting down in the water portion of the marsh. And I want to show you the palette knife that I like to use. It is about a 2 1/4 inch long blade. It has curved edges, not pointed edges here, and the tip is rounded. It has a very, very flexible blade on it. And this is the palette knife that I love to use to apply accents to a canvas. It gives a very interesting brush mark or tool mark actually to your painting, and it looks different than anything you will get with any sort of brush. So the flexible blade metal palette knife like this is a great tool to have in your kit of supplies, and we'll be using this to apply our light and dark orange clouds to our sky in just a moment. This is a great time to pause the video, and I'm going to dry mine using a heat tool so that I can make sure that all of this is completely dry when we are ready to come back and start adding our next layer of color on. Before we add our orange clouds to our sky, we've dried our canvas so that we can apply a glaze, and we're going to use FolkArt Dioxazine Purple. So I'm going to put a small amount of that out on my palette. And I'm going to load my brush with some floating medium. And I'm just mixing that in my bristles on my palette. And I'm going to just load the brush by putting the corner of the brush into the dioxazine purple. And I'm going to soften that color out on my palette just by blending in the same spot so that I create a gradient on my brush. I'm getting the brush ready on the palette before I apply it to the canvas. So I'm loading the brush so that I have strong purple color on one half of the brush, and you could see that that color creates a gradient over to nothing. So we're going to come up here on our canvas, and I'm going to start over here on the right-hand edge of the canvas, and I'm going to begin just to brush some of this purple on right at the edge of the canvas, and I'm going to soften this color, moving across the light blue of the clouds. Just stroking this on using long, light vertical strokes. And as I'm starting to run out of paint, you can see that I now have this nice transition from deep purple over into blue and then finally to light blue. And that's how we apply a glaze to our color underneath. You need to make sure that the color underneath is dry, and then you can add this transparent glaze of color on top. It's a very easy way to alter and change the color of whatever you have underneath it. So we're going to pause the video here, and I'm going to dry my glaze so that I can apply my orange clouds on top of it and not disturb this at all. Now that this area is completely dry, you can see that we do have this great transition from really, really dark purple, and you can see how that is changing the color blue underneath, giving it a great transition right there. So we're going to move on to our light coral colored clouds. So I'm going to put out some more colors on my palette, and I am using FolkArt Pure Orange. So I'm going to put a nice amount of that out on my palette. I'm also going to put out some FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment Yellow Light. And I already have out some titanium white. And we'll see when I mix these colors up if I need to add any toning colors to this. So I'm going to move some of my orange over here so that I've got a little area to work in. And we're going to mix up a nice light coral color. And I want you to be in the habit of always wiping your palette knife off. So clean your palette knife off each time you go from one color to another. That way you don't contaminate the colors on your palette. So I'm going to mix in some yellow light into my pure orange. And when you're mixing the colors with your palette knife, make sure to mash and press down on the paint, and then be sure to constantly push it back into a pile. This is the easiest and most effective way to mix paint. If you just try to stir your paint with the tip of your palette knife, that's not really going to get your paint mixed very well. So mash and push it back into a puddle. And by pushing the paint into the puddle, you will give it enough mass to help keep it from drying out. All right, I'm going to add a chunk of titanium white to this. It's probably not enough white, so I'm going to pick up a little bit more. Really going to lighten this up and make a very nice light coral color. And this still looks a little too orangey to me. Now that I've added that white, it's really revealed the color a little more clearly. So I'm going to add some more yellow light to this, making sure to wipe my palette knife so that I don't contaminate my yellow. And again, mash the paint with your palette knife. You want to mix that thoroughly so that you don't end up with any bits of unmixed paint in your puddle, because that'll be an unpleasant surprise when you apply it to your canvas. Once again, cleaning off my palette knife before I pick up more paint. So I'm going to add again another bit of yellow light to this mixture. And I think we were coming up on a nice kind of peachy coral color here. So my mixture again is FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment Pure Orange, Yellow Light, and Titanium White to make this color. And pushing it again into a puddle of paint so that it will stay wet for a good long time. We are going to begin to apply our large cloud formation. We're going to use our palette knife to do this, and it's a nice study in complementary colors. Our background is a very, very dark blue color, and now we're adding a light orange color to it. So we not only have an extreme opposite of color families, but we also have an extreme difference in value. So this is going to create a lot of excitement and drama in our painting. So what I'm going to do is I've loaded my palette knife with the paint on one edge of my palette knife, only on the back of the palette knife, and I'm going to start in the middle of my cloud formation, and some of the highlights I'm going to pull down and others I'm going to pull upward so that I always end up with a nice outside edge of my cloud formation. So here we go. And again, picking up paint on my palette knife, I'm going to begin to put this on, and I'm letting some of this come up over the purple and blue of the upper clouds that we put on in the beginning of the painting. And you can see how I'm getting this kind of speckling or sputtering of the highlights. And then I've got some of these nice little holes in there. And all of this is creating visual interest in our cloud formation. And that's what we're looking for. So load your palette knife as often as you need to apply this paint. And it's going on pretty thick, which is exactly what I want because I want this to be an opaque cloud formation. I want my orange color to be solid everywhere except around the edges. So again, working from the center, going up or down, creating those nice broken edges. If you don't like the way something looks, don't worry about it. You can always come back and just break that up a little bit more. Okay, I'm thinking that looks pretty good. I want to come back over here and make this just a little bit wider. You have a great photograph to go by that's available in the Let's Paint Color Lessons kit. So use that to your advantage as something to look at to give you a bit of a guide. I'm going to come over here in the sky and I'm going to add another little bit of an orange cloud. And no matter what I do, I will never be able to create two cloud shapes that look the same. But what I don't want is this little kind of, looks like a little alligator mouth. So I'm going to add a little bit more to it to cover that weird shape up. And I'm just going to realign this a little bit. There we go. And let's add a little bit of an orange cloud down here. So we've got three nice orange clouds up there. And I'm going to add some reflected clouds here in the water. And just refer to your photograph to give you a little bit of a guide as to where these are going to go. And I'm just picking up some orange on my palette knife. And I'm going to start over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to drop down a little bit. And I'm going to use the edge of my palette knife to create a flat line of color and just flick this up, creating a little bit of an orange reflection of my orange clouds in the sky. Okay, those are nicely done. I've got a nice straight edge, or pretty straight edge along here. And when we come back with our darker clouds, I'm going to keep that edge and reflect some of the dark orange downward. Again, picking up some of my coral color on the back side of my palette knife, and I'm just going to reflect a little bit over here and try to put this on and leave it alone so that we're not constantly putzing and playing in the paint. Okay, so now we've got this light color on here, and we need to lock that in place so that we can add some more interest to this without disturbing what we have on our canvas. So it's a good time, once you have established your pale coral color clouds, if you want to pause your video, you can, and we will going to clean up this little drip of paint that has bothered me since it happened. Didn't go unnoticed, but we're going to clean that up and dry our canvas, and then we'll come back and begin a layer of glazing. We have dried our canvas now, and I want to add a glaze of darker, richer color here on the light coral clouds. So I'm going to put out a little naphtha crimson on my palette. Just going to give myself a few color options here. I'm also going to put out a little alizarin crimson. And alizarin crimson is a beautiful, transparent kind of burgundy color. I'm also going to put out a little burnt sienna, which is a nice, rusty kind of earth tone. So I have some color options here from red to burgundy to rust, and I'm probably going to end up kind of using a little mixture of all of them. So I'm going to dress my brush in floating medium. Just pick up some floating medium and work it into the bristles of my 1-inch flat brush. And now I'm going to just put the corner of my brush into some naphtha crimson and a little alizarin crimson here. Maybe a little bit more alizarin crimson. Just looking at the color that I have on my palette, and it's looking pretty nice. It may need to be darkened or deepened when I put it on the orange clouds. So I'm going to start again over here at the edge of my canvas, and I'm just going to brush a little bit of this on, and you can see just how dramatically that glaze of color changes the orange tone of my cloud. So I don't really have to worry about going off the edge of the orange because this color is very transparent, but I'm just going to apply a little bit to the orange cloud formation. Then I'm going to wipe my brush on my shop towel by pinching it between the shop towel so I don't get paint on my hands, and I clean my brush off and groom it back to a nice flat shape. I'm going to pick up a little bit of floating medium on the brush, and I'm going to just begin to brush and soften this color from the top of the cloud to the bottom, brushing back and forth and just softening this from right to left, adding a little more floating medium as I move across the cloud formation, just to make this paint a little slippery and to let it slide a little bit more easily. I'm just brushing back and just softening that color. And there we have added a very nice warm glow to our clouds. Now you could add more if you wanted to. You could continue to brush some of that alizarin crimson and naphtha crimson on. I could alter it by adding a little bit of burnt sienna to it. And I could just continue just to add a little bit more of this glaze to the cloud formation. And again, just blend and soften it in using long, light strokes. And that's really how we just add a nice glaze and change the color of our cloud formation. Now that I have done that out here to this point, I think I just want to continue to tone this orange just a little bit more. It's a little different than what I did on the original painting, but that's okay. Just going to carry a little bit of this color down here and just soften it up into the clouds, just kind of changing that orange tone and giving it a little bit of a pinkish cast. And there we go. So just altered that a little bit more. And at this point, I think it's a good time to pause the video and dry your glaze to lock that in place. Now that our red tinted glaze is dried on our light coral cloud formations, we're going to mix a darker orangey coral color for our darker cloud formation. So I'm going to start again with FolkArt Pure Orange. And to my pure orange, I'm going to add just a little bit of my light coral mix. Might add just a little bit more of that. This is not a precise color mixture here. You can, of course, adjust this to suit your artistic taste. Some people will want to do this and they will want to have some more, might want to put some red in this to make their clouds a little bit more pinky. It's up to you. I'm just going with kind of the rusty orange coral colors for a more classic complementary color scheme. And to this, I'm going to add a nice healthy amount of burnt sienna to tone this. And I'm going to add a little bit of, just a little alizarin crimson to add a little bit of fire to this color. Always clean your palette knife on your shop towel before you go to pick up another color. Okay, now I have a nice coral color here, nice rusty terracotta color, which I think is going to be fantastic against that dark, dark blue. So once again, thoroughly mixing your paint by mashing it and pushing it back into a puddle of paint. You don't want surprises in your puddle of paint. Okay, so now that we've mixed that color, we're going to do pretty much what we did with the light color, but we're going to create our darker cloud formation. So I'm going to load my palette knife with some paint. It's on the back of my palette knife. It's only on one edge. There's no paint on the front of my palette knife. And I'm going to start by putting the flat edge of my palette knife next to my horizon line. And I'm going to then just scuff this color up, holding my palette knife very parallel to the surface of the canvas, picking up more paint as I need it, and just kind of icing this darker color on. You'll take a couple of tries to find out exactly how much paint you need to make it come off of your palette knife the way you want it to on your canvas. And I'm just making sure that some of this opaque color comes right up over my orange clouds that we put on initially. And then once again, start right down at the horizon line, keeping that horizontal, and just letting this color kind of skim off and sputter at the edges. And you could do this technique if you wanted even a pastel colored sky. You could certainly do this on a light blue background and use your palette knife to create some very, very pale blue or white clouds. It's a technique that lends itself to lots of different kind of sky interpretations or cloud interpretations. Loving how that's just kind of speckling off, sputtering off at the edge there. Keep that palette knife parallel to the edge of the canvas. There you go. Just letting that color sputter. I'm going to come back and put a little bit more paint so I've got it more opaque there. Just like icing a cake. And I'm worrying about that little area more than I needed to. Just softening that color up. Okay, now we're going to reflect some of this color down into the marsh area. So loading that color up on the back edge of my palette knife, and I'm going to come right next to these light cloud formations that we put on earlier, and I'm going to set the palette knife down and just let this color trail off. And every time you do this, you're going to get a different effect. All right, so I'm really happy with the way that both of these cloud formations look. And so before we glaze this area, I'm going to dry the entire canvas so that that color that's on there is locked in place. So if you want to pause your video when you've brought it to this level and then dry it thoroughly, and we'll be back to add some glazing to our clouds. Our canvas is completely dry, and we are once again going to add a glaze of a transparent color onto our darker coral clouds just to add some more variety and interest. So I'm using once again my big 1-inch flat brush, and this is the one that has a little dioxazine purple on it, and I'm going to pick up some alizarin crimson on that same edge of the brush and a little burnt sienna. So mostly alizarin crimson, a little bit of dirty color that was in the brush, and a little burnt sienna. And I'm going to begin to lay this color on right over the darker orange cloud formation. And you can see just how quickly this color really changes that cloud formation. And this is what glazing does best. It alters the underneath color, and it allows you to make quick changes to color without having to repaint the entire painting. I'm just going to add a little bit of that up here, just kind of softening that on. And then I will just blend this back using long, light strokes. And because it's transparent, it's not going to really matter that I've run it off the edge here or over on this side just a little bit. I will take a shop towel, and I'm just going to soften a little bit here at this edge, and right up here at the top, just soften that down just a little bit. And when this dries, the edge of floating medium there will dry transparent and clear, and we won't notice that transition from wet paint over to dry paint. I'm going to put out some other colors on my palette, and we're going to begin to establish the marsh grasses in the foreground of our painting. So I'm going to put out some FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment Yellow Ochre. I'm also going to put out some sap green. And I might put out just a little bit more burnt sienna. Put some over here so that it's closer to where I'm going to be working with these colors. And instead of mixing my colors together with a palette knife, this time I'm just going to wipe off my 1-inch flat brush, and I'm going to pick up the sap green and burnt sienna. Just kind of brush mix these colors together. And I'm going to use lots of burnt sienna in here. And I'm also going to add a little alizarin crimson. Green and red are complementary colors on the color wheel, and so the alizarin crimson is going to help dull down my green mixture even more and make it a nice dull color. So we're going to take this dull green color, and I'm going to use the corner of my flat brush to begin to scratch on some dark marsh color onto the front plane of my picture. Just as you can see, I'm using the 2 corners of the brush, just scratching this color on, and then I'm going to begin to stretch it out a little bit. Again, still just using the corner, and I've not picked up extra paint. I'm just stretching out the paint that I was originally picked up on my brush. I'm going to now pick up a little bit more paint because I want to stretch some of this color up even further. What I do not want to do is to have a straight or regular line at the top of my marsh grasses. I want to make sure that that line has some variation and variety to it. And I'm going to continue using the corner of the brush and scratch this green color on, carrying it all the way across the front of our picture plane. All right, so nothing difficult there. I have an irregular height to my marsh grasses, and this is all a nice dull dark green color. And I'm going to add some yellow ochre to some sap green, and again, just mix this on my brush. So now I've lightened up a green color. And have not added any water or any floating medium to this. I want this to go on fairly strong, and I'm going to test this color right over here in the lighter area of my marsh. And that color's brighter green, but it's not too bright. I could add a little burnt sienna just to tone it down a little bit more. So I want it to be light but not garish, and I'm just going to begin to scrub a little bit of this green color on, this lighter green color. And I'm creating some interest here by having some darker areas and some lighter areas. So don't apply this in a solid, opaque fashion. We just want to add some light areas to our marsh grasses, mainly scratching on with the corner. We could do a little bit of patting some color on with the flat edge of our brush, but the corners are going to give us more interesting and unusual and varied marks. So I'm just going to continue to add a little bit of light over here, not nearly as much as we have over on the right-hand side of our canvas. Just scratching on the base of our marsh reeds and grasses. Don't think about painting individual grasses or anything at this point. We're just establishing some base green tones to our canvas. So at this point, if you have brought your painting to this level, you are welcome to pause the video. I'm going to take a moment and dry the marsh grasses so that I can put some lighter highlight colors on and not interfere with the background layer of grass. We have our marsh grass established and dry, and I'm using a 1-inch flat brush, and I'm going to go into my lighter green that we used on the marsh grasses, and I'm going to add a little bit more yellow ochre to that, making it just a little bit lighter. And I'm going to use the corner of the brush, and I'm going to, oh, that's not light enough. When you put something on and it's not what you want it to be, stop right then, evaluate what you need to do to correct it, and then make that change. Don't continue on hoping that it's just going to get better by itself, because that generally doesn't happen. So now I've got a lighter color here, and I'm just going to add a little bit of brightness. I want that still to be a little bit lighter and brighter. So just simply add a little more yellow ochre, brush mix it in, and scratch it on using the corner of your brush. Just adding a little bit of lightness over here. It's not any particular shape, it's just some light areas. If you're using the corner of your brush, you're going to have some interesting marks, and that's exactly what you want. Now, as I move over maybe a little bit more than halfway across the canvas here, I'm going to begin to establish some longer reeds, and I'm going to do those with the chisel edge of my flat brush. I'm just going to stroke those on just like that. And we're just establishing some larger, taller reeds. I want some of these to actually come up and come across the horizon line. Just brushing those on. We're not done with these. We're going to do a little bit more to them, but we're just establishing our larger, brighter reeds. How many do you need? I don't know. You just have to start applying them until you have a pleasing number on your painting. You don't want to put too few because then they won't really look like much of anything. And you don't want to put too many because then it'll just look like overkill. So a pleasing number of large reeds on here. Some of them are going to be a little bit more vertical. Some of them can have a little bit more of a tilted angle to them. Some you could start at the bottom. Some you could start at the top of the reed. It's up to you how you want to apply these to the painting, but they should not all be the same. You want to have variety within these larger reeds that you're putting on your painting. Please don't line them up like you're using hash marks to count, like 4 uprights and then 1 diagonal or something like that. That's not going to look very interesting on your painting, but you can come across several of them and just have a reed that's at a little bit of a different angle. You have to make sure that you are creating visual interest on your painting. You can't just keep using the chisel edge of your brush. Some of these will be taller, some of these will be smaller, but they need to have variety. So some can come from the right to the left, creating that sort of diagonal, and others can come from the upper right down to the lower left, cutting across, creating a diagonal that way. I am just pressing enough on the brush to make the paint fall off. I don't want to have all of these the same width. So if you press harder on your brush, you're going to create a little bit wider reed. And if you use less pressure, you will have a reed that's a little bit more narrow. Okay, I'm really going to load my brush with more yellow ochre. And I'm going to apply a few reeds that are basically just going to be almost solid yellow ochre. And I'm going to go over and between some of my other reeds. So I'm going to start, just pick one out and just go over that. And you see I get a much lighter color reed there. I'm not going to do all of them, just going to pick out a few here and there to add some interest to this and to create some variety. I'm going to lighten one of these really long ones that's cutting across that horizon line there. Now, to lighten them even more, I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow light in with my yellow ochre and my sap green mix here on the palette. Just brush mixing that in there, making it like a really pale straw color. And we're going to come back and we're just going to add a little bit of a highlight to some of our reeds. Not all of them. We just want to pick out a few of the special ones to add a little extra highlight to. You don't want to overpaint these reeds. This is a very abstract painting, so our illusion of the reeds is really all we need. Some of these marks, just these little light marks here, they're going to read like grasses when someone looks at your painting, and it's really all we need to establish. We just want the illusion of marsh grasses. Just going to add a couple more highlights, and then we're going to set this off with some spatters or some fly specking. Okay, just taking a little look at this. I think that's going to be plenty of action here in our foreground, and there are less over here on the left and almost none over here on the right. So right in the center area is where we have the concentration of our marsh grasses. Now that we've established our main reeds, we're going to come in and add some interest to the bottom of the canvas by fly specking using an old toothbrush. And this is one of the best tools you can use to add spatters to your painting. So I'm going to dip my old toothbrush into some water, and I'm going to thin down some of my sap green and yellow ochre color here on my palette. You have to thin your paint down so that it will spatter off of your toothbrush. If your paint is too thick, it will not come off of your toothbrush. If your paint is too thin, it will come off in big globs. So you need to practice a little bit. And I like to lay a shop towel near my palette or on my palette, and I can do a little practicing on this. What you need to do is to aim the bristles of the toothbrush at what you want to spatter. Then you will pull your finger across the bristles of the toothbrush toward you, and the paint will spatter off of the toothbrush away from you. So aiming down, I'm going to spatter, and I'm seeing some paint come off, but it's coming off not as I would like it to. So I'm going to add a little bit more water to this. Again, just mix it up here on the palette. And now I'm going to test again on my shop towel. There we go. I've got some nice variety of spatters. So I'm going to apply this to the bottom of my canvas where I have the largest concentration of grasses. So I'm just adding some spatters right here in the front of my canvas. And you can control where those spatters go, but it just adds a lot of really cool interest in here. And so I've added some green spatters, but I want this painting to be more interesting. So I'm going to kind of rinse off my paintbrush, and I'm going to thin down some burnt sienna. And I've got a little bit of sap green in there, and that's okay. It's a nice rusty color. Thinning this down with water on the toothbrush. I'm going to add a little more water to this and just mix it in. And then always test before you go to your painting. So again, on my shop towel, I'm aiming the bristles where I want the spatters to go. I'm going to pull my index finger toward me and see what the spatters are looking like. I need to add just a little bit more moisture to this because the spatters aren't quite big enough. So add some water and again, mix it in. Aim the bristles at what you're spattering and pull toward you. There we go. That's looking good. So I'm going to pick up some more paint and I'm going to come onto the painting and I'm just going to add some interesting rusty spatters. Rusty spatter sounds like a country singer. But just adding some of this rust color in here, and that's really doing just what I want it to do. It's breaking up some of this color here at the bottom and adding more interest to our marsh grasses. So usually the spattering is the last thing that we do to a painting, and I think that is going to be all I need to do to the sunset marsh. But I'm noticing one thing that's bothering me just a little bit, and it's this edge right over here is not very smooth and even. And so I would like that to be much more even than it is. So I'm going to use a 3/4 inch flat brush and some of my original background color, which was uniform blue. And I'm just going to come in here and clean this up. And I'm going to show you that it's easy enough for you to clean up anything that doesn't look the way you want it to look on your painting. Everything's not finished until it is finished. So you can come back in here and just drag your brush along. So that you have a nice level horizon line. And it's easy enough to do that here at the end. Just that easy. There we go. I'm going to touch that up right there. And we have a finished painting of Sunset Marsh. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed painting Sunset Marsh. Join me next time when you'll learn to paint Tuscan Sunshine.